let's do. I want to have somebody up front, like dramatic. Are we live streaming now? Yeah, maybe? Yeah? All right. Live and direct, coming to you from Chattanooga, Tennessee. CHADEV, July 22nd? Is that right? 21st edition. Wow, almost got my day right. That's an accomplishment. So welcome to CHADEV, everybody. Big shout out to our sponsors right up here. Thank you guys for making this possible. Lamppost, Carbon 5, Collab, Emma, Society of Work, EPB, and of course Chattanooga, University of Chattanooga, Computer Engineering, College of Engineering and Computer Science. Ooh, need to learn how to read. All right, so I think we have a few announcements today. Jeff, where are you? Quickly, Jeff's going to come talk to us about the Teacherpreneur program. Teacherpreneur program. Everybody get up for Jeff.
Thank you for that introduction, Brett. Hi, y'all. I'm Jeff. I work for the Public Education Foundation. Many of you may recognize me as the person who comes here and asks you for things. That's what I'm doing right now. Thank you to those of you who were at Hack Night last night and talked to our Teacherpreneurs. Teacherpreneur is a startup incubator for educators with ideas about changing public education. So we put them through a 48-hour kind of pitch workshop, and they've given us these ideas. And they will pitch Sunday, July 31st, 4 o'clock at the Church on Main. I want to invite you all. Admission is free. There'll be snacks. There'll be actually a sort of open bar. Come out, support education. Find out kind of the kinds of teachers we have here in Chattanooga, the kinds of things they're thinking about, the kinds of innovation we have coming directly out of the classroom. And they're pitching for funding. We fund these projects up to about $10,000, a number of them. Some of you have worked with varying levels of success with the projects before, paid but sort of at a nonprofit-y rate. But if you're interested in maybe getting involved hands-on on a project, Friday, July 29th in this room at 5 o'clock, they'll do some pre-pitches, just a quick, this is what I'm working on, this is the kind of help I need, and then we'll spend the rest of the weekend hanging out on this floor, working on those ideas. So if you're interested, there's a link for registration on the Meetup page. Talk to me, email me. My picture is Andrew Rogers' face. So email the right Andrew Rogers' face. But thank y'all for all you do to support public ed.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Anybody else? Speak now. Yes, Stuart, come on up.
Hey guys, just a reminder, if you haven't registered for Scenic City Summit, which is August 12th at UTC, please go out and register, get your ticket now. If any of you work for TVA, we just found out that TVA is going to reimburse the cost of your ticket, so please get out there and register. Thank you. Scenic City Summit is a one-day event. It's going to have a bunch of speakers from across the country talking about emerging technologies. Campus of UTC, it's going to be an all-day event. Lunch is included. Just a great opportunity. ScenicCity.com. Oh, ScenicCitySummit.com.
That's right. Go ahead and get your tickets now. Yeah? Come on up here. Get this going.
Hi, I'm Anna. I work for Carbon 5. And I've been running the Codex X Meetup group, which is Women in Tech. So if you're interested in that, go find us on Meetup. We have a Meetup coming up that's going to be joining the UX group. So if you're interested in UX, there's a UX Meetup that's happening Thursday, the 28th next week at 5 at the Feed, which is on Main, down in Southside. And then August 4th, I'm going to be doing a Git with GitHub introduction for Codex X. So if you're interested in that, find us online. And then that's going to be at 6:30 here. And then we have Rails Bridge coming up. That is on August 12th and 13th, but it is in the evening. So if you come and you go to Scenic City Summit, you can come and hang out and do the Install Fest on that Friday. And then that next Saturday, which is the 13th, we'll be doing like an all-day workshop, introduction into Rails. So if you're interested in that, you can find us on Bridge Troll, and I'll throw something on the Meetup, some links and stuff. So, cool.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, come on, don't be shy. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you guys David Neal. David works out of Nashville at LeanKit, and he's a developer advocate there. He's a Microsoft MVP. He's been traveling all over the world. I think most recently Oslo, right? You did a conference in Oslo. Giving talks all the time, and we're really excited to have him. So give a warm welcome to David Neal.
Check. There we go. How y'all doing? I grew up here in Georgia, in Dalton, and then moved to Nashville for about 20 years, and now I'm back in Georgia again. So Chattanooga's just in my back door. I'm up here all the time, so I'm really excited to be here in what I consider to be my hometown to speak to you guys. And I feel all lonely down in Dalton. I don't know any other developers. I know a lot of developers in Nashville, but this is great. I hope we can connect and get to know one another. And I do see some familiar faces from maybe past meetups and Code Stock, and maybe even the old DevLink. Moment of silence for DevLink. And I'm going to try to respect everybody's time. I know we're kind of constrained on ending on time. My name is David Neal, as I've already said. I'm Reverent Geek on the Twitters, blog on reverentgeek.com, and I want to talk to you today about this awesome technology that I've been working with called Electron. And you can trust me because I wear glasses and I have a beard. I like to ride motorcycles, and I eat a lot of bacon. So we're talking about Electron today. Why do we even want to consider building desktop apps in the world that we live in today, with everything being web and mobile first? And I'm going to give you a quick crash course on how easy it is to get started with Electron, and give you some tips of what I've learned building Electron apps so far. And this picture, buckle up y'all, it's the law, that was taken I guess I have to admit I was driving. But that was right here in Chattanooga on my way to Oslo 2 years ago, the first time I went to Oslo. So a little bit of background of me. I am a .NET developer. I have been doing .NET since the very, very beginning. I was at the PDC in 2000 in Orlando, where Microsoft announced C# and .NET for the first time. They gave everybody these little books titled Presenting C#, and being the nerd that I am, I went back to the hotel and I read the whole thing that night, and I was convinced this is the future for Microsoft, and this is the future for me. And so I've been doing .NET ever since. So when the need arose in my company to create some cross-platform apps, my first thought was, hey, I've got these .NET skills. I'll create a .NET app using Xamarin. Our mobile team was having some success, or has been really successful building mobile apps with Xamarin. They've built iOS and Android, and they're doing really well. So I thought, well, Xamarin has a Mac desktop app or framework as well. So I'll just create some Mac apps with .NET. And my experience was, Yes, you can have a shared .NET code base. So the core of your application in the form of like portable class libraries, DLLs and so forth, you can share that between a Mac and a Windows app and even a Linux application. But that's kind of where the benefits ended. Xamarin Mac does not get the same amount of love that Android and iOS do. And so it's the tooling was kind of incomplete. It was much harder to work with. Documentation was really hard to find. And native UI is still extremely hard. So I'm a web developer. I've been doing web stuff on ASP.NET since I was doing web development even before ASP.NET, so I've been doing that since the late 90s. I don't know the first thing about creating WinForms or WPF, and even less about using Xcode UI Builder on Mac. And so my experience was really, really frustrating. And then deployment is really hard. So we've kind of solved that problem in Windows with the .NET framework being, kind of ubiquitous and already being installed on modern versions of Windows. But on the Mac and Linux, you have to deploy Mono and have to build that. And you can fry an egg on your laptop while you're trying to build Mono. And at the time, licensing was also a barrier. So this was before Microsoft acquired Xamarin, and to build an application with Xamarin Mac, it was like $1,000 a year. And for just some one-off utilities to help my customers, this was kind of a deal breaker, because I couldn't justify spending that much money just to create some utilities, because I wasn't going to be. It's not like I was building something to sell. So this was my experience overall in sum total for using .NET to build cross-platform. So I heard about this really cool technology called Electron, and I decided to give that a try. And so the pros that I found are it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So these are technologies that I'm already familiar with and comfortable with as a web developer. And Electron is based on Node.js and Chrome. And not just any version of Node.js and Chrome, but a very specific version. So if you're using the latest version of Electron, you're building against the latest versions of Node.js and Chrome. And you're not having to worry about cross-platform, cross-browser compatibility issues. I don't have to worry about my CSS looking perfect on Firefox or IE or anything like that. I can target just Chrome, and that's really, really refreshing. And there are no deployment dependencies. This is so awesome from distributing your application standpoint, that when you package an Electron application, it's bundling Node.js and Chrome into your app, and that goes with it when you distribute it. So the people who are using your application, they don't have to have a version of Node.js installed, and they don't have to even have Chrome installed. This is totally, sandboxed or self-contained as part of the application. So my introduction to Electron, as I started to get into it, was more like this, and it was really awesome. Well, I mean, every framework comes with its trade-offs, right? So I'd be remiss to not point out some of the cons of Electron, and it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you're not already a web developer, then that could be a challenge for you. We all love to hate JavaScript language and so forth. I'm wearing one of my favorite T-shirts. JavaScript happens, and so we like to bash JavaScript. But it is a great language. I will say though that since you are targeting the latest version of Node.js and Chrome, you can use the latest features of ES6 without having to do transpilation with Babel or any of that kind of stuff. So you can use modern JavaScript, which is really, really awesome. Some history about Electron. It was created by GitHub for the Atom editor. You probably have seen Atom. It's a really great tool. And they split off the shell piece of it into, formerly it was called Atom Shell, and they later renamed it to Electron. They've been actively working on this desktop shell since around January of 2013. 1.0 was released earlier this year, and last time I checked, they're up to 1.2.6, and they're rapidly fixing things. They're rapidly innovating on it. They're staying really, really close to the you know, like within a week of the latest version of Chrome and Chromium that comes out. So they are really staying on top of making this a first-class system for building desktop apps. Some of the features of Electron, based on my experience and talking to other organizations that have used it, it allows for rapid development. So if you do have, you know, some guys who are comfortable doing web technologies, you can create a desktop app really, really quickly. Because it is CSS and HTML, it makes it really easy to do different themes. So you may have, you know, like using an editor, you like to use a light or a dark theme. That makes it really easy to, when you're building your own applications, to also give your users that same kind of flexibility, as well as maybe, you know, you want to build an app that targets one market and, you know, take that same app and rebrand it for another market. Well, that's just some, you know, swap out some assets, swap out some CSS and some images, and you've got a totally different looking application that does the same thing. It targets at 2 different markets or more. And you probably, if you already have a web application, there's some code, JavaScript code and UI that you can borrow and leverage in both applications. There are companies that are taking a lot of what they've already built for a web app and easily moving that into Electron to create a desktop app, or in some cases, just using the you know, having a desktop shell that is essentially making calls into their web application. So the web application is still hosted on, you know, their infrastructure, their cloud, or wherever it is, and the application is essentially calling into that and presenting that to the user in some unique way with some additional client-side features, maybe some offline features. Electron has already solved a number of problems around building and deploying desktop apps. Some of that is around deployment and these silent updates. So if you've used Atom or some other Electron application, you've probably noticed a little pop-up notification that says a new version of this application is available. Do you want to download it now? Do you want to restart and, you know, apply it now? Well, that's kind of baked into the Electron framework. It makes it really easy to give your customers that kind of real seamless and easy to deploy experience. And in addition, Electron includes quite a few native user experience extensions to Node.js and Chrome. So if you want to do things like file open and save dialogues, printer dialogues, menus, system tray notifications, all these things are hooks into whatever operating system the Electron application is running on. So it looks to the user who's using your application, they would never know the difference. They would never know that they are using essentially a web application on their desktop, because it looks like any other desktop application they're familiar with. So why do we even care about building desktop apps? Well, here's some ideas, some reasons I've talked to people why they've created desktop apps, and also my experience. So offline capabilities is one. Being able to have like a data entry type application where you're going off in the field and collecting data and then coming back and synchronizing that with a system. Maybe, you know, healthcare, going out into the field and collecting information. Using a real desktop computer is a whole lot easier to do data entry than trying to use a touchpad or something like that. Being able to access local hardware like printers and devices, 3D printers, scanners, all those kinds of things that are you know, much easier to get to that hardware from a desktop computer. This was my use case. So I needed to have an application that ran on premises at a customer's location. You know, it's unreasonable for me to expect them to open up their firewall and allow me to reach into their network and grab some data and synchronize that back with our application that's hosted in the cloud. What we really need is an application that's running on their system that can access that data and only make, you know, API calls out, back out through this firewall. And so, you know, for security purposes and you know, a lot of logistical reasons, on premises may be the reason why it makes more sense there. Internal line of business applications, being able to edit local files. Maybe you want to monetize your application in the App Store. Maybe you got I've seen where there was a great online application for like document editing, and they turned it into a desktop app, and they're selling it for $5 in the App Store. But hey, they're making money. Why not? A kiosk application, so like in retail or healthcare or something like that, where you have an application that's taking full screen of the application that somebody can walk up to and interact with, like a check-in station or ordering station. And then in some cases, as I was talking with one of the guys here before we started, was sometimes it's just logistically easier to build a desktop and deploy a desktop app than it is to get IT involved and go through the red tape of just getting an intranet application installed and then updated, then managed and maintained. It's like there's 5 people need to use this. I don't need to go through all that. I'll just give 5 people a zip file and let them run the application. And then I think that there are still just some classes of applications that it just feels right for them to be a desktop app. Here are some ideas. I'm not going to run through the entire list, but these are some things that I could think of and some examples of desktop apps that I've seen that seem to kind of still make sense to be, some of them can be web-based, but again, a good desktop client is also really nice. Some examples of Electron, we've talked about Atom. Atom is a great editor. Who here uses Slack? Quite a few of you, if not everybody. I mean, that's the typical response I get everywhere. Well, if you use the Slack desktop app on Windows or Linux, you're using Electron. There's some, I haven't gotten clear clarification on whether the Mac client is an Electron application, but definitely Windows and Linux. And this is what really caught my attention. When I found out that Slack was using Electron, it's like, wow, I would have never guessed that was a web app. They're using, like React to render the front end. And then who here has heard of Visual Studio Code? Yeah? So when Microsoft released this, I'm thinking, wow, my first assumption was it's .NET. Somehow they were able to figure out how to build a cross-platform application using .NET where, I couldn't. But no, Microsoft is using, Node.js and Chrome with Electron to build this great tool. I don't know if you've used it, but I have been really, really impressed. It's actually probably the best JavaScript debugging features of any application JavaScript editor I've used. Another interesting example is Wagon. It's a SQL editor. You can use it to manage SQL databases, lots of different platforms, lots of different types of relational databases. And this is one of those things where it just kind of feels right to have a desktop application. Your DBAs might be a little leery about using a web-based application. Again, having to open up your firewall and allow some external application to come in and manage your databases, that's not going to fly. If you've done anything with APIs, this is one of my favorite applications. Since I work so much with APIs, Postman is a fantastic app, and now they have a desktop app that does everything, and it's built on Electron. Surprisingly, they've only released it for Mac so far. I don't understand why, because it's so easy to build a Windows and a Linux version from the same exact code. So I don't know what the reason is for just limiting to Mac, but I can't imagine that they won't release a Windows and Linux version soon. Nihilus N1 is a mail client, so a desktop mail application. It's open source, and the cool thing about it, since it is based on Electron, it's HTML and CSS, so it's really easy to create different themes for it, to customize it, and it's also easy to build packages. So just like Atom and Visual Studio Code, you can create extensions for N1 to do lots and lots of things, like integrate with GitHub or some version control system, or to give you hook in with translation services so you can translate emails as soon as they arrive. Add in all kinds of features and hooks to customize your email exactly the way you want. Speak is another example that you would look at this application and say, how could that be a web app, essentially, or even be an Electron app? They've done some really interesting things around these dockable UIs and floating windows And Speak is like a chat, video conferencing, and desktop sharing application. And they're hooking into the native WebRTC capabilities in Chrome to be able to provide this kind of two-way communication experience and collaboration. And one of the most amazing examples of Electron I've seen is Jabu. Jabu is they're calling it a family social robot. It's kind of like the Amazon Echo. Something you would put somewhere in your house. But this guy is like a little animated cartoon character. He can move around and tilt his head and change expressions. He really interacts with whoever's speaking to it and can show information. So the UI is essentially a React and Electron application running on the robot. And then the SDK, the editor that you use to create your own kind of plugins and interactions with the robot is an Electron app. So now that I've told you some about Electron, I want to show you how easy it is to get started. Those of you familiar with Node.js will recognize this is, NPM is a Node package manager. This is how you install apps for a Node application. So whatever operating system you're on right now, you will need some version of Node. It doesn't have to be the latest version of Node, but you do have to have that in order to get started. So you use npm from the command line to install Electron pre-built, and then you need a couple of files. You need a JavaScript file and an HTML file, and the names of those files really don't matter. This is just a way to get started. And the way Electron works is it starts its lifetime as a Node.js process, and in Electron vocabulary, that's called the main process. And from that main process, it can then launch one or more instances of Chrome that are what they refer as the renderer. And so you can have just one home page, or if you need multiple windows in your application, you can certainly launch those from that main process. The main JS looks a lot like this most of the time when you're getting started. In JavaScript terms, we're requiring in Electron. So how many here are .NET developers? Are familiar with .NET? So you could think of require as being that imports or using statement. So this is how in Node.js that you're able to pull in dependencies into your app. So we're creating an instance of Electron, and from that Electron library, we're getting an app and a browser window. And the app allows us, there's quite a bit of application lifecycle events that happen, similar to like jQuery when you're like waiting for the DOM to be ready. The application lifecycle ready means that the application's finished starting up. Now you can start doing some of your own interesting things. So in here, we're going to create our main window, and we can do things like set the width and height of that window. And there's a lot more properties we could set on that window. We can do things like the positioning, the minimum width and height. We can center it. We can make it resizable or not resizable. And we can also launch it in that kiosk mode where it takes full screen. And once we're done creating the main window, then we can load whatever contents into that window and display it to the user. So in main window.load URL, you can load a local file. Is typically how you're going to build an Electron application, is have local HTML files and local JavaScript files. But load URL could be like a real URL. You can point that to some hosted application and load that into the window. Your HTML file can be as simple as this, with a head that has a title and a body. And to start an Electron application, at least when you're doing it in development, you're going to go to the command line and use Electron as like a drop-in replacement for Node. Like when you're starting a Node application, you type Node space and then a JavaScript file. Electron, you're going to type Electron space and then a JavaScript file. And when you do this, it's going to bootstrap with that main JS, and then it's going to load in the file contents of that HTML file and give you your application. You'll notice that the title that's set in the HTML becomes the title of the window, and the body of the HTML becomes the contents of the application. And you can do anything and everything that you want. If you're you're comfortable with doing React or Angular or Knockout, or you just want to use plain HTML and some jQuery, any of those things are fair game. You can use whatever front-end framework that you're comfortable with to build out the contents of your application. Well, that's pretty neat, but what is really, really awesome about Electron is some things that they're able to do to extend Chrome. So my first thought was, well, I need to create some kind of back-end, web server so that Electron can talk, my front end can talk to the back end. I'm thinking in terms of building a web app, right? Well, you don't have to do that with Electron. In Electron, anything that you can do with Node, you can do directly inside your HTML, or directly from your HTML by referencing JavaScript files that are on your system. So I can add a script tag directly in my HTML. I can do things like look at the process versions of Node and Electron and Chrome. Process is a Node.js service, and I can do things like require. I can use require to pull in any Node.js native or external package as a dependency directly inside my application. So in this case, I'm bringing in the native file system module, and I'm iterating over the files that are in the home directory. So I've got access to, environment variables like the home directory of the person, the application directory of where the application currently lives, and I'm able, as I mentioned earlier, I can do things like ES6 syntax without having to do transpilation. I can use, fat arrows, and I can use spread operators and all the latest and greatest ES6 stuff that makes JavaScript a whole lot easier to work with. And when I launch this application, then I can see things like I'm running Node.js 6.1, Electron, Chrome, and I've got a list of folders and files that are in my home directory. And so, normally Chrome is sandboxed. It can't do anything other than show you a web page. Well, the version of Chrome that is that's in Electron has full access to the local system, to the file system, to the hardware, so that you can do anything that you could do with Node.js, you can do directly from your Chrome, from your HTML. Another interesting thing that since it is Chrome, we can also show the Chrome DevTools. So on launch, we can do main window.open DevTools, and we can show that either inside the same window, or we can detach it into a separate window. And so if you've used the DevTools from Chrome as a web developer, you know that you can set breakpoints and inspect your stuff. It's really, really awesome. It's from a developing standpoint, you can interact with your application, kind of under the covers as you're building it. You may have heard there's two hard problems in software development: cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. That's it's a problem that plagues us all. Yep. So I submit that there are actually 4 really hard problems in software development. I don't know what your development workflow is like, but I know in my company, it's really, really important. Like when we're doing code reviews and doing peer reviews, and we submit pull requests, we use Git for our source control. It's really important to be able to choose that perfect animated GIF to express how you feel. If you use Slack, right, you probably use Giphy, which is horrendously bad. I mean, it's just so comically bad that it's almost awesome, but it's not. So I created an Electron application that solves this problem. I call it Reactor because it's a reaction GIF, plus I'm using React, so a little play on words there. So I can fire up my Reactor application. I can search for something like Spock, and it's like, you know what? That's pretty good. That might show what I'm trying to convey, but I think there's something better I could use for how I feel about the code that I'm looking at. So let's see. This one might be better. Spock comes over, smashes the computer, Yes, I think that really conveys how I feel about this particular code that I'm reviewing. So I can directly copy that to the clipboard, paste it into Slack or my pull request or wherever I want, and away I go. So this may be the most important application I've created in my career. And if you're interested in this app, it's out on my GitHub repo. I go by Reverent Geek everywhere, so if you go to GitHub/Reverent Geek, you can find Reactor. Process module. So again, going back to the vocabulary, that process is the main process that launches. It's kind of like a Node.js process, and then you've got the renderers. So there's some native Electron modules that are available. App is one of those with application lifecycle and environment variables. IPC for doing inter-process communication. So you like to be able to communicate between your main process and the renderer modules, you're going to use kind of like a publish-subscribe mechanism over IPC. Dialog is that native-looking, file and printer dialogs. Menus. You also have a power monitor, so you can know if they're running on battery or AC, or in the case of like running on a laptop, if somebody's closed their lid and it's about to go into hibernate mode or standby, you can be aware of those events and take appropriate action in your application. Or if you're building a video app and you want to make sure that the screensaver doesn't kick in while somebody's watching a video, you can hook into those kinds of events. And then the system tray. On the renderer side, you've also got IPC, so sending messages back to the main process or sending messages to other renderer instances. Remote is a way to basically short circuit IPC and call into process level things directly. WebFrame is a special kind of iframe where you can sandbox the contents. So if you're building a desktop application but you want to reference something that's external, you can do that in a web frame and be sure that nothing's going to, you're not going to open up any kind of security problems inside your application by pulling in that external content. And then modules that are available to both. Clipboard, I demonstrated just a moment ago, being able to access and copy to the clipboard. You can paste out of the clipboard. There's a built-in crash reporter, which is really awesome. So you can when your application crashes, you can set up an endpoint on your system to receive a crash dump remotely. You might want to tell your customers that you're collecting that information, but it's a nice feature to have. Native image, this allows you to do things like those tray icons and be able to handle like Retina displays on Mac and different display depths on Windows. And then the screen module is really cool that you can not only can you find out the dimensions of the screen that you're running on, but also how many displays a person may have connected to their desktop and be able to take advantage of multiple displays. So if you want to have two different windows running like a multi-window application. And then the all-important shell, which allows you to not only launch external applications and maybe scripts and things like that, but you've got to have a system.beep somewhere in your application. Recommended tools. Electron Debug gives you the Chrome dev tools. This is what I ship with a lot of my applications, and it enables the keyboard shortcuts to bring up the Chrome dev tools. So I have a customer who calls me and says, "Hey, your application's acting up. It's not doing this correctly." I can tell them to hit F12 or Command-Shift-I, and it'll pop up the Chrome dev tools, and that freaks them out. But then, we can walk through, hey, are there any errors in the JavaScript console log, and we can step through, especially if I can do a remote, session with them. Electron Reload is really useful for as you're building an application. So instead of having to close your app and then relaunch it every time you make a change to HTML or CSS or JavaScript, Electron Reload monitors your local files that you're using in development and will automatically refresh your app every time one of those files changes. So it makes it really, really easy. Electron Packager. So to be clear, when you're creating an Electron application, after you've created like your HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you can take those files along with the Electron binaries and just ship that. You can give somebody that, and that's all they need. I mean, the icon is going to look like an Electron icon when they run the application, but they have a functioning application. Electron Packager takes that one step further and packages your application into its own executable. So you can have your own icon and basically something you can zip up and give somebody. Electron Builder takes that one step further and creates an installer for your application. So you can create a Windows installer, a Mac DMG file. It makes it, what people expect on the Mac is being able to drag that application into their applications folder. That's what it gives them. And then a Debian package for Linux. Electron Updater is a useful library for doing those silent updates, being able to deploy updates to your app. And then if you're into doing TDD, BDD style development, Electron Mocha is a replacement for Mocha that also understands the Electron modules and things that are available to renderers in your process so that you can create good Mocha tests. There's also a brand new feature added to Electron. So they've created this with 1.0. They added a Chrome dev extension called Devtron, and that allows you to be able to see things like the inter-process communications between the main process and the renderers. And you can also, it's got an Electron linter built in, so you can get some suggestions on how to build your application. It's got lots of other features. There's also a Spectron testing framework that can test not only your JavaScript code, but can also test your front end as well. There are a number of boilerplate projects available for Electron. My favorite is just called Electron Boilerplate. It's very agnostic. It's not opinionated. It just gives you a lot of great tools around packaging your application and deploying it. So it's basically has all these utilities as NPM scripts that you can call and gulp tasks. And then it's just a blank starter HTML file, and you can start from there. If you want a more opinionated approach and you're using React, Electron React Boilerplate is pretty good. There's also a number of others. I haven't checked in a while, but I imagine if you're into doing Angular, there's probably an Angular boilerplate project. One project that I'm especially excited about is called Electron Pre-Built Compile. This is one of the developers on the Electron team at GitHub created this as a drop-in replacement for Electron Pre-Built. And what it gives you is a native understanding of the latest, like ES7. So it's got Babel built in. You can use TypeScript directly, CoffeeScript, things like React and Less and Jade templates and CSON. It understands all these things so that you don't have to create you don't have to use Webpack or use any build scripts to transpile your code. You can just code, like if you love TypeScript and that's what you want to use, you can just code directly in TypeScript inside your HTML and JavaScript, and this will interpret it, at runtime on the fly. When you're building like your front end for an Electron application, people ask, what do you use to design your front end? Well, I'm not a designer, so I rely on like some CSS frameworks to create a good looking application. So this is an example of an application that I created, and then I'm just using HTML, CSS, some jQuery, and this is Twitter Bootstrap. So I didn't get too fancy with it, just creating some forms and stuff. And Twitter Bootstrap works great, makes it look like a really nice looking application. Going one step further, there's this was created by one of the GitHub guys called Photon Kit, and it's a CSS framework directly targeted at Electron. Right now it's targeted at Mac, so when you create an application using Photon Kit, it's going to look like a really nice Mac application. When you run it on Windows, it looks like a really nice Mac app running on Windows. But it looks beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous. And this is what it looks like. I created an application using PhotonKit, and it looks great. I mean, when I run it on Windows, it's like, hey, this is not bad at all. I mean, looks good to me. I'll quickly run through some things you need to know about building, packaging your application. Again, you can just zip it up and hand it to somebody, but if you want to create like installers, you need to know, like when you're developing on Windows, you need Windows 7 or higher. You need the latest Visual Studio 2015. The free community edition works fine. You'll need Python, some version of Python 2, and the reason for that is a Node.js dependency. Node.js, when it compiles native extensions, so the way Node.js works is a lot of it's JavaScript, but some of it's portable C libraries, and they need to be compiled on your operating system for that particular architecture. And so when you're pulling these packages down from NPM or from GitHub, it needs to be able to compile those locally. And so you need Python, and it uses Visual Studio as part of that process to compile. And you need some version of Node and some version of Git. And the Git dependency is so that some packages that you pull down out of NPM, it's going to want to reference some versions that are still hosted in Git. Building on the Mac, you'll need OS 10, or what are they calling it now, Mac OS 10.8 or higher. You need Xcode, you need some version of Node.js, and if you happen to have installed Python using Homebrew, you need to also install PyObject-C so that it can compile C code on your Mac. On the Linux side, we need Python, Node, Clang, and some GTK libraries. Tips from using Electron so far. These are just little things, but like this, if you're on a Mac and you hover over a link, it turns into a little Mickey Mouse cartoon hand. Well, people don't expect to see that when they're using a desktop application. So setting your default cursor to everything, is kind of an expected behavior. Little things like that. Setting some drag capabilities on like text and images. If you're using Chrome and you click on an image and start to drag it, you get a little ghost image that you can move around on the screen. Well, you probably don't want that in your desktop app. You want it to look and behave like a normal desktop application. So you can turn that on with these kinds of things. If you have multiple windows and somebody goes to close one of your windows, look for that close event and then just don't actually close it. Just hide it. Because we all know Chrome's a little bit on the bloated side. It takes a little while. And so to give a really snappy, responsive experience, just hiding that window, and then next time they want to see that window, you can just instantly display it for them. Some tips on local storage. You can certainly just read and write local JSON files. So if you need to store some configuration, it's really nice to, from a user experience perspective of remembering the position of the window when it was last closed, or the dimensions of the window. So like when somebody launches that application again, they expect it to be in the same place and the same size that they used it. So you can store that kind of information in just a local JSON file. I use FS Jetpack, which is a really nice library around the file system module that's in Node.js, and it gives you some native capabilities to read and write JSON files. You can also use something like AnyDB, which is a kind of a MongoDB light database, document database. There's also PouchDB, which is pretty much API is identical to using CouchDB. The nice thing about PouchDB is that if you want to enable offline capabilities where you're synchronizing with an external system, you can do that with PouchDB. You can say when it's connected, and you can connect to this CouchDB server, synchronize your data with that server. On the relational database storage side, Siri8 is a great library for doing SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, Oracle DB, and then there's anything that you can do with Node.js, you can do with Electron applications. You've got an entire 250,000 plus modules to choose from anything and everything you can think of. If you need to communicate with services outside of your application, there's probably Node.js packages available for you. And as we were discussing earlier with that SQLite, if you really want a relational database locally, you could probably use SQLite. I haven't done that myself, but I'm pretty sure that would work. From here, go to GitHub and search for, or just search Google for Awesome Electron. This is like the exhaustive list of everything, anything and everything Electron. It's got tutorials, videos, blog posts, sample projects, all kinds of stuff. It's got everything. If you have access to Pluralsight, Rob Connery has a video course called the Electron Playbook that's really good. It's not really a getting started guide. It's more of a here are some good ideas or good tips on building Electron applications. And then the documentation at Atom is really good. They even have a sample application that kind of you can run and interact with it, and it's an Electron application that teaches you how to develop Electron. And also, if you are on Slack, there is a really, really active Slack community around Electron. The Electron channel on Atom has a couple of GitHub's Electron developers on there all the time, and people are really active on there. Last thing I want to tell you is you don't need permission to be awesome. We as developers are, this is a great world that we live in. No better time to be a developer. We have such opportunity to affect the lives of so many people, and the things like these community meetups are awesome because we can learn new things and take them and go and do awesome things. And I forgot about this slide being in there. Ignore that. But if you are interested in my hand-drawn illustrations that I love to do, I have a blog post out on Medium and on my website about using hand-drawn illustrations to effectively communicate, to give presentations, and for readers. Makes a big difference. And do we have a few minutes for questions? Yeah. All right. So anybody have any questions? Yes.
So you mentioned HTML, JavaScript, CSS. That sounds a lot like Cordova. Have you done any Cordova mobile development, and how is that story compared to Electron?
Well, I have not done Cordova, but I've heard the comparison made many times that Electron is kind of like the PhoneGap Cordova equivalent for desktop. I did have, I had a question before about, well, can we run Electron apps on mobile? Can we go that direction? And the answer is no, because Node.js won't run on mobile. Node.js is tied to particular architecture, and the V8 JavaScript engine and all that stuff that's really critical to Node won't run on mobile platform. But I've certainly seen or heard people make the comparison of, this is kind of like the equivalent of doing PhoneGap or Cordova for desktop apps.
Yeah, just to add to that response, since I have done hybrid mobile app development with Cordova, it is very similar. So the relationships between the process backend and an Electron application is different because in Cordova you really are dealing mainly with front end, but and then any kind of hardware calls are Cordova plugins. I've actually found Electron to be easier to deal with because it's just Node inline.
Yep.
So.
Awesome. Any other questions? Thank you for your input. Any other questions? All right, we got one more.
So the requirement to install Visual Studio or Xcode, is that just for the C++ redistributables to make sure you can compile the assorted node modules?
Yeah, that's mostly what that's for, is to be able to compile C on that system. There are some, so if you use older versions of Electron, which you can still access, those can use older versions of Visual Studio, but I think somewhere around, I I think it's, I want to say Electron 1.2. With that particular version of Node.js 6.1, it became dependent on 2015, unfortunately. So you can use older version of Electron and be able to work with Visual Studio 2012, 2013. Yep.
Got time for one more.
Is there a way to protect the source code for an Electron app?
No. So you can obscure it. You can do some things that would make your normal user where they would think it's it's totally uncrackable. But essentially, you can deploy your application. The HTML and CSS and JavaScript is in your application. It's buried down in some folders, but you can find it. There's also a way to package up everything about your application into an ASAR file, and that's basically like a single resource file. It's basically a zip archive of everything that's in your application, and reference that in your app. So from a user's perspective, most people would look at that and say, "Oh, well, can't crack this. It's ASAR." But as a developer, well, it's essentially a zip file that you can change the extension and get everything out of it. But yeah, there's no way to really crack down on that. I guess you could take, you can obfuscate your JavaScript, minify it, and obfuscate it so it's really hard to understand, really hard to make sense of it. And I guess if you really want to go another step further and put the core of your application in a C library, maybe you could do some interesting things around that to secure it. I don't know. I'm not a C developer. All right. So, any other questions? Well, you can find me as Reverend Geek on the Twitters. I'm a Twitter addict, so ask me questions there. I'll hang out for a while. But thank you very much for having me.